Good morning. I'm Karen Mullen, and on behalf of the Planning Committee, I welcome you to GUGM 2021. It's unfortunate we can't be together today down in Macon, or up in Macon, I guess if you're on South Georgia, but it is great to see so many of you joining us this week. I want to thank all of you this year's presenters for sharing their ideas with us. And as you work on summer projects, and we all prepare for a fall semester that is uncertain, consider taking some time when the call for proposals come out next year to share your own experiences with the rest of us. A reminder to use the Q&A feature to ask questions during your sessions, and enjoy your GUGM week. I now pass the baton over to Lucy Harrison.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to GUGM 2021. We're happy to have you here. A special thanks to the program team of Kara and Tim Daniels, also from the University of North Georgia. They spent a lot of time working with us, pulling this event together. And as many of you have discovered over the last year, a virtual conference is even more work than a conference that's happening in person. On the Gil Galileo side, also Sean Boyle and Joy Woodson have gone above and beyond to pull this all together. And if all goes as planned, you will not even notice all of the work that they did to make this conference happen very smoothly this week. So hopefully everything will go well for you over the next few days. Kara and Tim got the honor of being part of our program committee because they are part of our GIL functional committees. And any of you who are interested in participating on those, we are currently looking for volunteers to serve on the GIL committees for slots that will cover the next 2 years. Ask your library director if you're interested in participating in one of those functional committee areas. No matter what your role is in the library, we'd love to have your participation on one of those teams. So again, ask your library director, then they can submit your nomination to Sean Boyle. So this year's theme for GUGM is staying the course in uncertain times. Certainly this has been a very strange year for many of us. Staying the course, I think we have all discovered that staying the course sometimes means that you need to make changes. Not necessarily in the direction that you're going or what your end goal is, but in the way that you get there. And that is certainly true for all of us, has been true this year, and will continue to be true moving forward. Staying the course doesn't mean doing things exactly the same way. As many of you know, we will be embarking on a formal procurement process next year. We are currently using the Alma Primo suite of services from Ex Libris, and may well still be using those on into the future, but we are going to embark on a formal procurement process. There are a lot of alternatives out there. Open source has come a long way since we've made the decision to move to Alma Primo. And certainly in the state of Georgia, our colleagues over at the Georgia Public Library Service have shown that an open source solution can work at scale for libraries within the state and has the support from leadership in the university system as well. But as we all know, the famous saying, open source is free as in kittens, and kittens are a lot of work. We might potentially want to wait for those kittens to grow up a little bit before we take on their ownership. So we're currently in the middle of, or just kicked off, an RFI process, request for information, with the goal to understand better the options that are available right now to us in open source solutions and their level of maturity. As we start that process, we've invited Marshall Breeding here to talk more generally about the status of library systems. He's going to touch on open source, but also library systems, library management systems, and other systems from vendors as well. Marshall Breeding is an independent consultant, speaker, and author. He's the creator and editor of Library Technology Guides and the libraries.org online directory of libraries. His monthly column, Systems Librarian, appears in Computers and Libraries. He's also the editor for Smart Libraries newsletter, which is published by the American Library Association, and has authored 9 issues of ALA's library technology reports, as well as many other articles, book chapters, and 8 full books, including Cloud Computing for Libraries, which was published in 2012 by Neil Schumann, now part of ALA TechSource. He also regularly teaches workshops, gives presentations at library conferences, offers up his work as a consultant on a wide range of topics. I had the pleasure of working with Marshall back in 2014 and 2015, right before I came up to take on this position at Galileo. I was the chair of the NISO Discovery to Delivery Committee, and we worked with Marshall to have him write a white paper called The Future of Library Resource Discovery, which at one point, I don't know if it still is, but at one point was the most widely downloaded NISO white paper ever. He did a fantastic job on that. And today, he's going to be using some of the work that he does annually in his annual library systems report, which is published nowadays it's published in American Libraries, but it's been published since 2002, previously in Library Journal. Annual report on the status of library systems technology. I know he's going to be drawing from that today, as well as from some other sources. So please join me in welcoming Marshall Breeding to GUGM. Marshall, take it away.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Let me get my screen shared here. If everything looks right, tell me if it does. Okay, so I'm delighted to have a chance to speak with you today, kind of give you an overview of what's going on in the library technology industry. So I understand that we have up until the top of the hour for this session. I'm also willing to kind of go past that to answer questions, if we still have questions that you have. I understand there isn't a session right after this. So moving right along. So here's the abstract that was printed. One of the resources that I maintain, my primary resource is Library Technology Guides. That is kind of the main source for data that I use for kind of my research, the talks that I give, everything that I publish when I can comes back to this website. So I hope that is a place that you'll want to visit when you're looking for more information on systems. Librarytechnology.org covers lots of different systems, features some more than others that are prominent in the US, but there's data on companies throughout the world. There are hundreds of companies involved in the library technology industry. Don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but just kind of show some of the recent changes that I've made in the website. There's a lot of information there. A lot of it is, if you know that it's there, you can kind of find it. One of the things I did last year was to start developing more dashboard approach to portraying information. Where it just takes a single page that brings a lot of information together, then you can drill down for more. So what you're seeing now is a page for Ex Libris, looking because it's the company you're currently working with. And it kind of gives you a lot of information, the main products related to library management, leadership, history of the company. We'll look at that later. Employees, articles, chronology, kind of a lot of different information put together. So I hope that's useful to you. Same thing for each product. Where is it used? What kinds of library uses it? What are systems like? What are some articles written about it that I might have put on the website? Satisfaction survey data that comes into play. So really just try to make a lot of information available. That's kind of what I do. Again, these figures actually come out of the library systems report. One of the questions that I always explore is, does any given company have the resources to give good support for its products to continue development? So one of the questions I ask every year is about that. How many folks work for the company and what roles do they have? So going from that, with information on the website, let's think about more what's going on in the technology industry in the last few years. I've been following the industry for, I guess, 30 years now. It's hard to believe how much time, how quickly the time goes by. But it's been really interesting to watch the library technology industry kind of grow up from kind of the early mainframe days when I was involved with Notice and those kinds of systems to kind of see how the different companies have come and gone and how systems have progressed and how the different cycles of technology have shape the kinds of systems that we have available to us today. So as Lucy mentioned, the Library Systems Report is a project I've been privileged to do for a long time, since 2002, between Library Journal and American Libraries. So it's kind of the main industry report for libraries and the technology systems that we use. In larger industries, there would be probably a variety of different reports. You know, Gartner and other kinds of folks would do analysis and study. But, you know, even though it seems big to us, library technology industry is really kind of small. And so it's, you know, I think it's important to be able to kind of within the library world, kind of think about the systems and the companies that are involved and kind of look at them every year. Kind of see who's doing better, who's doing worse, you know, those kinds of realities about the companies and the systems that we use. This next slide just kind of summarizes the years that I've been doing it. The Library Journal Marketplace report predates me. Other folks were doing it before I took it over in 2002. And then in 2013, agreed to change it over to American Libraries. These every year, you know, come up with little taglines, you know, kind of in a few words, you know, what kind of summarizes what happened that year. So you can kind of see in these taglines kind of interesting change for the main things that happened in the history year to year. This year, the report that was just published, which we see here, its tagline is "Advancing Library Technologies Through Challenging Times." Well, we all know that we've had challenging times in the last year. So I don't know how many of you have had a chance to take a look at this. It's available on the American Libraries website. It's always available, open access, so you can get to it and read it. So again, this is kind of my attempt at capturing what happened in the year. The articles published usually every May. So what it's capturing is what happened in the previous calendar year, plus whatever things may have bled over into the first couple of months of 2021 in this case. You know, that since it shows up in print, the lead times are quite a bit. So it's not what's happening to the minute, but really what's happened in the last year. So let's think about that. Let's step back a couple of years first, because really what's happening in this phase has been kind of building up for a couple of years now. Beginning about 2019, I would say, was kind of the beginning of the latest phase of kind of the business of the library technology industry. The first sign of that was ProQuest coming under new investment. You know, it's a complicated ownership arrangement between the Snyder family and its major investors, but Iteros investing in ProQuest was kind of a major shift for ProQuest and in their business direction. And it's really what kind of funded the acquisition of Ex Libris. So them coming to be part, of Innovative, so them coming in part of that, they'd already acquired Ex Libris, but another kind of series of acquisitions. So there were mergers and acquisitions that happened in the last few years, some kind of important in the US, some not so much. And also it's important to notice that the consolidation spans both the for-profit and the nonprofit sector. You know, it's been interesting to watch the consolidation of the nonprofits into Lyrasis over the last few years. And then Inface and ISO coming together. So there really is pressure to consolidate. So this year, there were no kind of gigantic mergers and acquisitions, but kind of the ongoing digestion of that. For one thing, I observed, and it's been interesting to watch, is that, you know, this was the year of the pandemic. So libraries had to make dramatic changes in the way they delivered their service, kind of away from in-person facilities and in-building collections to being able to do more of what they do virtually. Certainly we all realize that libraries were open the whole time, but the services were reshaped during this time. As libraries come back to kind of more in-person services now, it's built on a lot of the important work that happened, both by vendors and libraries. The functionality of automation systems wasn't tuned to be able to do curbside pickup and all the kinds of other services that we had to do during that phase. So libraries implementing new functionality, some vendors developed capabilities that weren't there before in support of kind of helping libraries provide the best level of service during this year as was possible. So I think it's important to recognize the efforts and accomplishments on both the vendor and the library side during that. In the mergers and acquisitions realm, there weren't any giant ones that took place. The acquisition of Innovative had already taken place, but it was flagged by the FTC, who is the regulatory agency of the US federal government that is on the lookout for anti-competitive issues. Usually FTC review happens before the close of an acquisition. In this case, it came after. So during a lot of 2020, the acquisition of Innovative was not exactly on hold. It continued to be owned by ProQuest, but there was a stipulation that they had to operate it at arm's length and not intermingle assets and so forth with Ex Libris or ProQuest. It had to be operated as an entirely different independent company. But in the end, that review came out clean, that it was deemed that there was not further action needed for related to that acquisition, and that ProQuest could go ahead and manage that company as they choose. They chose to continue to operate it as a independent company, but now they are more free to do internal partnerships and those kind of things between Ex Libris and ProQuest and so forth. But what does that mean? I think it signals that the kinds of bold acquisitions that have taken place so far haven't ended up being in what formally constitutes anti-competitive measures by the agency that regulates that. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. The other thing that happened in as far as systems is that the open source FOLIO system developed with support, both financial and in-kind support from EBSCO, as well as a broader community of libraries and other companies. It has moved on from its development phase, which it had been in for 3 or 4 years, into production. There are now a pretty good handful of libraries that are using FOLIO in production. So this is kind of the beginning of the road for that new system, kind of positioned as a competitor to Alma. Again, too early to see how it will do in the longer term, but it means that we can start kind of taking a look at it and how it's working for libraries in the real world. Innovative, again, on the public library side, is launching a new platform they call Vega to kind of refresh the look and services of, those public library systems in the way that they kind of do better discovery and engagement. And again, tuned toward the public library side of things. Polaris is used solely by public libraries. Sierra is more public libraries than academic these days, though the academic libraries do use Sierra. And then Ex Libris continues to do really well in selling Alma to new sites. So there's just a few things to say about that. So the business events, you can see by the bullets here, have slowed down a bit. The bigger ones happened in 2019 and 20, and the ones that happened, since then have been smaller. OCLC acquiring Compara Technologies, it's a fairly small firm that developed, patron-facing mobile apps. And EBSCO acquiring Zafira is kind of important strategically, but Zafira was a small consulting company. And then the change of ownership of Biblio Commons doesn't affect the academic library group that much. But it's all kind of part of this trend toward consolidation. As I write the systems report every year, the thing that I notice is that companies come together and they merge and their acquisitions, but there are not very many new companies, new products. This is not an industry of startups, really. Startups with kind of peripheral technologies might eventually get acquired by the main players in the library technology industry, but it is an industry where it would be really hard to have a startup come and sell a new automation system, get traction, and become a major player. For better or worse, that just hasn't been the dynamic of the industry. Rather, it has been, kind of constant mergers and acquisitions the whole period that I've been studying the industry. The earlier phase of that is what I would call horizontal consolidation, where one ILS company buys another ILS company, a direct competitor. So, the classic example of that is Cersei Dynex. And on the RFID side, the classic version of that is Biblioteca, that has acquired kind of companies in all parts of the globe related to RFID and material handling and so forth. What's happening now is different. The main difference is that it's not competitors buying each other, but it's top level library oriented companies buying technology companies, library technology companies. So, what would you call companies like ProQuest and EBSCO? They're library oriented, they have content, they have different kinds of services, different kind of products. So kind of library services, not library technology companies. But technology is becoming an increasing part of their business strategies. So the acquisition of ProQuest and later Innovative by ProQuest is kind of filling out, strengthening their technology business that had been there before. They'd acquired Serial Solutions and had, a lot of different technology products, but they went from being a small player in that sector to the biggest player. EBSCO, similar. They're more of a content and database company, becoming more and more involved in technology, but with a different strategy. Follett, again, not big in the academic crowd, but acquiring Baker and Taylor. Keep in mind that, so Follett's now about a $3 billion company annually, EBSCO more or less 2, ProQuest more or less 1. So, these are very large, multi-billion-dollar companies by now. So I think visually, and so one of my ongoing projects is try to visualize what the shape of the industry is like. I used to have kind of a single page that in a very crude way would show kind of the mergers and acquisitions of the industry. But a couple of 3 years ago, I started replacing that with these more detailed maps of the history of each of the companies. So I think it's fascinating to look at the history of the companies and how a lot of different incumbent and antecedent companies and products are part of the companies that serve libraries today. The way that I've organized this chart, and I follow this convention when I can, when it makes sense, is that the content products and companies are kind of below the middle, and those oriented toward technology are above. So you can see, kind of you get dizzy with all of the publishing companies that have been acquired over time and come together. But also, there are, a dozen or so technology companies that are now represented within ProQuest. So this is kind of a big deal. These are the big names when it comes to the history of technology for academic libraries, bringing in Endeavor with the Voyager system that was used by, by your libraries before moving on to Alma, but Ex Libris is part of that, acquired, and Serial Solution, an important part of the history of electronic resource management, and then Innovative joining the fold more recently, the Rapid ILL project coming into the fold through Ex Libris. And then what's different more recently is that the technology is no longer focused just on academic libraries, but the acquisition of Innovative signals involvement in public libraries. One of the fundamentals, I think, of library technology these days is kind of the separation of systems that work for public, academic, and school libraries. In the earlier days, the same systems were used by all kinds of libraries. That isn't such the case so much anymore. The nature of academic libraries and public libraries have diverged. Academic libraries, as you know, spend most of their collection budgets on electronic resources and managing subscriptions, open access, and all the different complications that it takes to acquire, manage, and provide access to electronic resources. Print resources are certainly part of the picture, but in smaller proportions by far than they used to be. And the opposite is true for public. They still continue to a vigorous acquisition and circulation of print materials, supplemented by downloadable ebooks and audiobooks. But the nature of automation is increasingly different between public and academic. The largest academic library, I think Harvard, has more or less 1 million circulations a year. And that's really a small, most public libraries have 20, 30, million circulation transactions a year. So just kind of the shape of the systems means that a system that is optimized for use in public libraries isn't going to be used very happily by academic libraries, and vice versa. So again, when you think about systems, there's what's different now than it was a decade or so ago is kind of the lack of crossover as much between public and academic systems. So EBSCO, again, more of a database company, but certainly an important player in the technology side, especially when you consider EBSCO Discovery Service, continues to be probably, it's hard to tell because numbers are reported in complicated ways, the most implemented index-based discovery service in the industry. So they have a lot of interest in the technology side and discovery and electronic resource management, often because it's a gateway to their content products as well, which is, as you see, kind of the majority of their kind of business interest. But their acquisition of Zafira kind of brings them in the forefront of the linked data conversation. Stacks, as a website building tool and so forth. So further and further involved with that. What doesn't show up so well in this chart is their involvement with FOLIO, even though they have made massive investments in the development and support of FOLIO. It's not done through an acquisition. It's done through partnerships and collaborative development and so forth. But if there was a way to show it on this graph, it would be important to know that is kind of their main involvement with technology in recent years, resource management technology. You can't, avoid kind of seeing the backing of EBSCO and promotion of EBSCO for FOLIO. This is strategic direction for them, along with others. It's not owned by EBSCO, supported by EBSCO. They'll have services surrounding it. So it's kind of different than the relationship between ProQuest and Ex Libris and Alma. So OCLC, likewise, so highly converged organization. And the nonprofit side, they have made many different acquisitions of ILS companies, mostly in Europe, more toward public libraries than academic, but they have some of both. Organically, they created WorldShare Management Services, which is one of the library services platforms that competes with Alma, and doing pretty well. have about 20% of the market share that Alma has, and more in the middle of the market than the high end of the market, which has always been Exley versus specialty. Again, it's important to see this top level view of a organization that's involved in content, technology, in OCLC's case, metadata and resource sharing. So a single organization providing lots of different products. So this next set of slides is, I think, important to think about. What has been the impact of all this consolidation on the industry, on innovation, on availability of products? So I did some research kind of looking at the history of the implementation of systems and the vendors active during different periods. So on this chart, you see that it goes from 2000 to 2020, so covering a couple of decades, and looking at the association research libraries, what were the major vendors that were active during each period. You've seen the blue here shows the kind of unstoppable advance of Ex Libris among that top tier. When it makes this big jump in 2006, that's when they acquired Voyager from Elsevier. And then you can see that Innovative is diminished a bit in their involvement with academic libraries. Cersei Dynex, its level of involvement was lower in the high-end academic market. And then OCLC is a presence, right? They have lots of libraries using WMS, but not that many ARLs. So it's a tough market to be in. So it kind of shows how things have shaped out. So when looking at individual systems over the same period, again, it's interesting for me to see the rise and fall of systems over time. You can see systems like VTLS that have waned and died out. You can see ones like WorldShare that began about 2014 and have come up a little bit, and others that have come and gone. What stands out, obviously, is the rise of Alma among the ARLs. It is probably the most dominant system among academic libraries. When I go and think about how dominant Notice was back in its days in the 80s, I don't think it had, I don't have a way to, haven't measured it exactly, but it never had the dominance that Alma has today. So to see a system kind of be launched in 2011-12 and to be able to capture this kind of market is pretty remarkable. And I think that the difference here is that it's a sector-specific system. In the most of the other systems that have come and gone were general-purpose systems. They were built for public academic and special libraries, whereas the focus of Alma and Primo has been academic all along. So it was built specifically for these kinds of libraries, and and it came out about the same time as WorldShare. So you can see that libraries kind of voted with their pocketbooks and generally saw Alma as being a good solution for at least the high end of academic libraries. Again, this is data that backs up these slides, kind of showing the different systems that were active in each of these phases. So during the 1990s, there were 20 different systems provided by 16 different vendors. So it was a pretty fragmented market. 2008, pretty dramatic change, that by that time there were only 6 systems in use among ARLs, only 3 vendors. So this was the time of over the course of the industry where there was the least competition. So a decade ago was a very kind of non-competitive time. So this is before Alma. Keep that in mind. 2020, it's interesting to see that there's more competition now than there was in 2008, despite massive consolidation since that time. The thing to observe in the industry is that as companies converge, their products persist. as long as libraries choose to use them in most cases. So today, there are 6 different vendors that are listed on the slide that have products that are being used in the era libraries. ProQuest, Cersei, Dynas, EBSCO, CLC, Bywater, and 12 different systems are still in use. So the point being is summarized in this next slide is that convergence and consolidation, of companies is different than talking about availability of products. Still, I would say that there are not tons of choices for libraries as they look at new systems, but there's more now than there used to be. So when folks say that the industry is merging toward monopoly, I guess I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing continued vigorous competition in each sector. No company can rest on its laurels and think that it will be able to coast. This slide shows the academic marketplace in the United States, kind of what the market share is across all sizes of libraries. You can see that by this measure, ProQuest has about 65%. As you look at the blue on the bottom right, Ex Libris has 51%. When you add in Innovative, they get a little bit more. So you can see that the acquisition of Innovative added a little bit of market share to ProQuest and Ex Libris, but it didn't double it or anything. What it does is bring in the public sector. When you look at mid-size, the numbers are different. Again, 68% versus controlled by ProQuest, 31% not. So it's pretty dominant and, certainly a large market share, but it's not monopoly. You can still see kind of an interesting variety of systems. What I want to move to next is talk a little bit about open source. So basics of open source. I think all of us it's been around long enough that we know what we mean by that. I'll just say a little bit. So open source is a particular type of software license. It's a particular type of kind of development model where there are specific rules that say what you can and cannot do with open source software. Open source software means that the source code for the software has to be made available. Anyone is allowed to use the software for free. Anyone is allowed to download, modify, and use the software and redistribute the changes that are made to that change version. So it's a software license. It's a kind of style of development. Most of the open source projects are what we call community-based, meaning that there is a kind of large group of organizations and individuals that kind of work collaboratively to build the software. Doesn't always mean that. If you look at the Koali projects and others, all the software is done by a single company, and then even though it's technically open source, it's treated much like proprietary software. So the styles of development vary depending on the project, but the ones in the library world have been more community based. There's a governance organization that will hold the copyrights, and then there will be different ways that the stakeholders will choose to organize themselves to develop, support the software involved. Keep in mind that it costs the same amount to develop software, whether it's done within a company as proprietary software or within a community as open source. So, there's no magic that makes software development cheaper if it's open source than proprietary. Some might even argue that it's cheaper to develop proprietary software because there's less overhead involved in kind of distributed development across folks working for different organizations. But that's not a big difference. The difference is kind of the ability for any organization to adopt the software and change it and use it the way that they want to, or to work with a services company to be able to implement it for their use. The key thing to keep in mind is that if you have pretty well, mostly mature, mostly completed open source software, and you're working with a support provider, you don't necessarily have to have more technical expertise within the organization to implement it and use it successfully. It's kind of a myth, I would say, that you have to have local technical expertise to implement open source software. You do if you want to do it all yourself. But for all of the systems within the library world, there are companies that provide commercial services, and the expectation is that those services will be equivalent to what you would get from a company offering proprietary software that they control themselves. So you have the ability to kind of lend a hand and lend technical expertise toward its support and development, but there's not a requirement to do so. So a lot of smaller libraries especially have implemented Evergreen and COA and FOLIO without having to have local programmers involved. So keep in mind that the open source community is a services-based system compared to the proprietary software, where it's kind of license and service together. So that software license legality is an important difference, but it's more kind of the community versus company approach. And also keep in mind that especially in the library world, there are development communities surrounding the proprietary systems as well. They just work on a different level, kind of working with APIs and other kinds of different levels of the system as opposed to the source code itself. So libraries then have to kind of make strategic decisions about how they are going to implement technology. Do they want to say, for this part of it, we're just going to buy proprietary software and let it do what it does? Hopefully it will do what it says they do. Or are we going to want to use our own resources in order to be able to contribute to its development and shape it in a way that we need to meet our organizational mission? So, I think it's interesting that there are those kinds of choices available that you can either build or you can buy. And that happens not only with the large management systems, but it happens with, repositories and other kind of utilities. So, where are you going to put your precious resources when it comes to technology and organization? So there are a lot of open source applications in the library arena. COA is the most successful, used by kind of mid-level public and academic libraries. It is the most implemented ILS in the world when you think that it's kind of the default system for Latin America, India, and other parts of the world. Evergreen in your home state of Georgia is a very successful integrated library system designed for consortia of public libraries. So public library functionality, almost all the libraries implementing Evergreen are public libraries. There are a couple in Canada that are academic libraries that have used it. They use other things for electronic resource management. It's been very successful. So it's happily used by large consortia that are comprised mostly of smaller libraries, but there's some bigger libraries using Evergreen too. The King County Public Library up in Washington surrounding Seattle has been a longtime user of Evergreen. And then FOLIO, kind of more the one of interest to your kind of organization, is off to a good start. It's under development. It's got a dozen or so libraries using it by now. So kind of a potential to be more of the conversation going forward. And then discovery, Viewfind, Blacklight are discovery indexes, the interfaces. They don't have an index. There's not an open access discovery index. Usually used in conjunction with the EDS or something else to provide the article level content. DSpace, Fedora for institutional repositories, very successful. Simply ebook management platform that's used more in the public library space. Interesting development coming out of the NYPL labs. So open source is a retained part of the library technology scene. In academic libraries, it's about 7.7% when I looked at it recently, and this is academic in the US. A little bit more in the public. Together, it's about 15.5%. And it's growing a little bit every year. When open source started coming into the library scene in about 2002 to 2005, I thought it was kind of really interesting to see whether, this would take off kind of with a hockey stick rise kind of climb and overtake proprietary systems, or whether it would be kind of a slow and gentle rise, or and it was the slow and gentle rise, and continues to be. There are, especially in the US, there are very good companies that are providing support services for COA and Evergreen. So those systems are doing well. They win a few every year, but it's not a wholesale shift from proprietary to open source. Keep in mind that because these systems are mature and there are solid and stable companies behind them, the risk level, I would say, is not necessarily higher than proprietary systems. It's just a matter of whether the system and the support arrangements meet your needs. So as I said before, with commercial support services, you don't have to have that internal technical expertise. But you get opportunities to influence product design, contribute to development. I hope you have that on the proprietary side too. Each company that has a proprietary system, if they don't listen to their customers and develop it according to their needs, they're not going to do well anyway. So I would say that the styles of participation for influence of design and functionality may be a bit different between open source and proprietary, but it's a difference of degree, not a difference of kind. And then if you want to, you can do your own local customized development. So kind of do your own thing with the system, based on an open source core. And then the question is, so if you're going to, how much should be packaged together? If you're going to do open source, that does, pieces of it like FOLIO, then do you need discovery service? Do you need a knowledge base? So there's a little bit of assembly required depending on the scope of the open source product that you're using. There may be some assembly required depending on the scope of the proprietary system you're using. Libraries have very broad needs for technology, and no one system will ever do everything. So you have to make some choices about what pieces and parts you're going to integrate, and what pieces and what pieces of functionality you expect to be bundled together. Just some numbers from COA, just again to demonstrate that it's a system that's doing well. It sees new sales every year. It's well used. Used internationally. Evergreen's used nationally. That's domestic system. It doesn't have a lot of uses outside the US and Canada. And then let's talk some about FOLIO. So I've mentioned it already quite a bit, that EBSCO is increasingly diverse in its content and its technology products. EBSCO Discovery Service has been the core of their technology offering for a while. And then, they kind of, when you look at what ProQuest and Ex Libris are doing, it matters to EBSCO in the sense that every Alma installation usually comes with Primo. So it usually means that if the library was already using EDS, they might shift to Primo, not always, in some cases, or that if a library implements Alma, it's pretty much tied to Primo, and it's unlikely sale of EDS in the future. Some libraries, and I think that probably applies to use in Georgia, will maybe have both, use Alma and Primo, use Primo for the direct resources managed within Alma and use EDS for article search. So there are different ways to mix and match it, but you can certainly understand that EBSCO has an interest in having a stronger presence in the resource management space, kind of as a defensive move to their other technology and content products. So it's a good investment for them. Again, it's not owned by EBSCO. They've certainly contributed more resources, I believe, than other organizations, but there are other folks that are going to provide services surrounding it. There'll be EBSCO FOLIO, which is the version of FOLIO that EBSCO will deploy on their hosting services that they'll so it'll be a particular set of functionality that EBSCO offers in their instance of FOLIO, and they'll call it EBSCO FOLIO. Index Data will stand up their own instance of FOLIO, and they'll be more alike than different, but it's possible for them to be different. And then Bywater Solutions is providing support. So I think the agreement is that EBSCO will provide hosting services and provide support directly, and Bywater Solutions will also provide support as an alternative for FOLIO hosted by EBSCO. So all gets kind of complicated. And then, of course, EBSCO FOLIO will be pre-integrated in a way with EBSCO Discovery Sources, their knowledge base, and their hosting and support services. So it's kind of confusing to think that it's open source, yet there will be different branding of it depending on what company is providing the hosting support services. Status is that the system is kind of out there in the real world. So libraries are using it today, some for full resource management, some for electronic resource management, depending on how ambitiously that they're implementing it, and when they're ready to change from their ILS. And then there's been some organizational changes lately, and that's kind of hard to understand, but keep in mind that governance is an important part of open source systems, and you want to make sure that any open source project that you depend on strategically has reliable governance and sustainability. So in this case, there's been a change so that there's a new kind of corporation stood up as part of the Open Library Foundation to manage the resources for FOLIO. Again, this is complex legally. And that there is kind of ongoing development between EBSCO and others to contribute to its sustainability. So it's great that when an open source system kind of gets to this level where it can be deployed in the real world, the important question is, are there enough resources going back toward developing it on a trajectory that will enable it to grow and expand at expected levels? Like with Ex Libris and Alma, there's these dreaded monthly updates, but it's also the fact that there are monthly updates. There is, there's millions of dollars of ongoing development that goes into the system every year to make sure that it continues to evolve and expand in functionality. So in the open source world, it's a shared responsibility. The list here kind of as of recently, and I don't think that there have been any announcements since I put together this list, but you can see that it's a pretty interesting group of universities that have implemented FOLIO so far. Ones that have done print and electronic, and some are just starting off with the electronic side. And other institutions that are on the way. As far as I know, none of these have moved it into production yet, but they are committed and part of the community. And my automation, my perception survey every year, I kind of look at, what libraries say that they're thinking about if they're changing systems. If you're thinking of changing a system, list some of the ones that you're thinking of changing to. And over the years, it's been interesting to see, last few years, to see kind of FOLIO kind of go up in that. So this year, 88 libraries that said that they're thinking of changing systems mentioned FOLIO. Still a bit under Alma, 104 mentioned Alma as a migration candidate. Koha, 54, world share 40. So, I see this as kind of an indicator, informal indicator of what libraries are thinking about to do next. So on the discovery side, one of the things that is important is, the patron-facing, customer-facing services. Discovery is a big piece of that. In previous times, I would say in the phase right before Alma really took off, libraries would make a separate procurement process for discovery than for resource management. But that's not the case now. In most cases, when a library or organization, consortia does procurement, it's discovery and resource management together. Not always that way, but certainly if any vendor responding to an RFP or RFI will propose both resource management system, Alma plus Primo, FOLIO plus EDS as part of the solution that they would suggest. There are only 3 discovery indexes out there in the world now, that have kind of comprehensive article level indexing, and that's EBSCO Discovery Service, Ex Libris Primo and Summon, both powered by the Central Discovery Index, recent changes, and then Wildcat Discovery. So, those are expensive projects that so far in the open source community has not emerged a comprehensive open access discovery index. So most of the implementations of open source solutions still depend on one of these backend indexes produced commercially. So there continues to be challenges between EBSCO and ProQuest when it comes to content discovery between EBSCO products and Ex Libris discovery and vice versa. I hope that that's getting better, but I still hear, some complaints that it's not ideal. And because these discovery indexes are so massive, again, it means it's hard for other folks to jump in. I think that there's been interest in an open access discovery index for a while, but it's just never, come to be because the process of standing it up and having the scalable hardware and all the processes to keep it updated are just enormously expensive. There are things like, Discover, which is a specialized discovery tool based on some AI with some interesting interfaces. But as far as I know, no library has implemented as their primary discovery system. I'm not going to say a lot about Alma. You're already using that. You already know most of this. The thing to keep in mind is that Alma is kind of the base platform upon which Ex Libris and ProQuest are deploying a number of other applications to address other needs of higher educational institutions. So Leganto for course list management, Esploro for research data services, Rapido, or however you say that, for interlibrary loan workflows. They acquired Rapid ILL out of Colorado State University. They're reworking the content marketplace for Oasis into a new platform called Rialto. So, Alma is not only a comprehensive resource management system for the library, it's the base for this other set of products. Looking for equivalents in the FOLIO arena that might be emerging, but I'm not seeing a lot of that yet. Certainly, there are pieces of that, the panorama analytics that was introduced a couple of months ago, Gobi as probably the most popular content acquisitions tool in academic libraries is nicely integrated, and so forth. So, they're kind of on that path, I think, but certainly Ex Libris has a pretty large head start when it comes into other applications that can be built on top of Alma and maybe even bundled to be able to address broader. Okay. So the last couple of things I want to talk about as my time winds down is consolidation cooperation on the library side. One of the important developments in the, it's been a part of the automation scene as long as there's been automation, but increasingly dominant in recent years is for libraries to band together and move from independent version instances of integrated library systems to shared infrastructure. So that's been the trend that I've been watching the last few years, is that more and more libraries are moving from independent ILSs to shared automation systems. That's no big shakes in Georgia. You've been doing that for a very long time. Between your shared Voyager ILS and your Alma ILS, the advantages of being able to take advantage of shared infrastructure to better make use of your collection resources to get better impact out of those and to improve resource sharing. It's kind of just built in the same way that an integrated library system with lots can do circulation among branches. In a consortial environment, you can do resource sharing across institutions without a lot of extra infrastructure. It's just part of it. So I think that is kind of the way of the world, and I expect that to continue even more, that the time of standalone ILSs is going to fade among academic libraries. Collaboration, I think, is increasingly part of the movement. So again, thinking about FOLIO versus Alma. So Alma, as you know, is a single code base sharing shared by all Ex Libris customers using Alma. You use the same, you see the same version of Alma as your colleagues in Europe or Asia would see. It's a global shared code base. There's it's like Facebook or Twitter. You don't have a different version than anybody else. It's shared. Of course, it's organized by institution and by consortium and so forth. So you only see the version, you only see your data and patrons and those kind of things, but the code base is globally shared. That's not quite the case with FOLIO. Even though it's a multi-tenant system, there will be multiple instances of FOLIO supported by different vendors or organizations. With Alma, there isn't an opportunity for any university to say, I want to install my own separate version of Alma. It's just not the way it works. With FOLIO, you could do that. Texas A&M, for example, I think plans to do that. Well, they will stand up their own version, provide their own support services, and it will be kind of their own instance of it. EBSCO will stand up an instance of a multi-tenant, so their customers will be supported that way. Index Data will do that. So the idea of there being a single global code base is different. That can be a positive or a negative thing, depending on which aspect of things you're thinking about. But again, shared technology infrastructure, I think, supports a lot of what academic libraries are wanting to do, to have better collaborative collection and development, shared access to collections, different ways that you process collections. So a lot of things that you can do once you are sharing a automation system with your peers that were kind of impossible to do when each one had their own separate ILS systems. So again, I'm not going to say a lot of this because you're doing it already, but it's just it's the advantages that I think that you get by sharing your systems. And you're in good company. Look at these long lists of major implementations. Most of them are Alma, not all of them. Shared infrastructure that libraries are choosing to do that. Okay. And again, the massive scale of it, University of California system, over 50 million records will be bibliographic records. So again, there's lots of big systems. Resource sharing is kind of built in. Again, you're already doing that. I'm not going to read the details. The slides are available to you. You want to kind of look at the bullet points in more detail later. And I think I kind of want to stop here. You know, I have kind of, I'll breeze through the slides. I'm not going to talk about them, where you can kind of see a lot of what we've already talked about the kind of parallel investments between ProQuest and EBSCO. Good points of contrast as you think about looking at both of these systems in the possible future. And then their strategies, again, you know Exlibris' strategy. Of course, they've been talking to you a lot about Leganto, Esploro, and so forth. And the disruption, what's happening now is Alma continues to be the best-selling system among academic libraries, but watch out because Folio is kind of on the horizon, and will it disrupt a lot of the sales? So what I want to do now is just kind of stop. I know I've been probably talking longer than I really intended to for questions, and I'm happy to go beyond the time to be able to talk to your, answer your questions. So let me stop sharing so I can see what you're doing. And how am I going to know your questions? Lucy, are you going to manage the questions for me?
Joy, are you gonna I see we have one hand raised, or we had one hand raised. Are you gonna unmute them, Joy?
I've given Jasmine, I think, did you have a question? I gave you the ability to unmute, I believe. Oh, no worries. That was a mistaken hand raise. That's fine.
Okay.
Well, as we're waiting for other folks to perhaps put some questions in, Marshall, thank you. That was great. Could you maybe talk to us a little bit more? You mentioned Reshare, and that's certainly another open source solution that we're taking a look at. What's your sense of sort of how mature Reshare is and its relationship to Folio or a standalone from Folio?
Okay, so my understanding, index data is involved in various ways. So Index Data First was the company that EBSCO contracted to do kind of the low-level code base for Folio. And they're the lead more dominantly. I think there may be some others involved, but this is mostly Index Data led initiative, is building this resource sharing system with some kind of early supports from different consortia. I forget which one was the one that is mostly backing it, but I would say it is a little bit earlier than Folio as far as production level completeness. But I think that, folks are taking a look at it because the resource sharing technology solutions are sparse, when you think about so of course we know about OCLC's interlibrary loan service. We know about the D2D product from Relay. Autographics has a resource sharing service, but this is an attempt to kind of take a modern approach to resource sharing that I think will be interesting and different. So built on you don't have to have Folio to implement it. It's based on that kind of microservices code base. So I think that's kind of gives them a head start in providing that functionality. And so it's, again, part of this interest in kind of expanding the core to address other aspects. So in the same way that Exlibris is offering, its own, resource sharing based on Alma. So there should be a version of that based on Folio, but on the reshare version, you don't have, you could use Alma and do reshare too. So I would say it's too early to know if it will kind of become a more dominant player in the resource sharing arena, but so far so good. I think it's good quality technology because it's coming out of Index Data, who is just very highly regarded in the way that they do open source development. So don't know a lot more to say about that, just that I think it has a lot of promise.
Thanks. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A that I'll go ahead and relay to you. One question from Chris Sharp. Have you heard much feedback about using And just for context, we do have one library in the university system that recently contracted with that will be implementing that.
So I think is really an interesting discovery tool. It is using machine learning and so forth. About it. You're using it to be able to explore documents in a different way than just keyword searching. So coming out of I wrote an article about kind of the history of it, which I think is interesting. But I think it shows promise for specialized disciplines. It is not at the point where you can expect the same kind of content coverage in that you'll get with Primo or EDS. Doesn't have that kind of index behind it. So I see it as being a good specialized tool that would be used for literature, kind of different areas, as opposed to comprehensive discovery and access that you expect out of Primo. So it's kind of in the mix. And the other thing that I didn't say when I was talking about kind of the index-based tools like Primo and EDS is that every academic library needs to have one, and they do in the US, but it's also the case that these are not heavily used tools when it comes to the overall picture of how researchers and students get access to library provided electronic resources. Maybe 15% of overall traffic to proprietary subscription-based resources is coming through the library provided discovery service and link resolvers and so forth. At least that's what the folks at JSTOR have been telling me lately when they look at their referral links. So it's part of the mix. Interesting technology. I think it's kind of fun to use, and I think it's useful. Yeah,
we'll certainly be keeping an eye on it as Kennesaw rolls that out. Another question come in from Barry. Do you collect data on total cost of ownership, especially between vendor versus open source?
So it's hard to collect cost of ownership data because almost always the cost of a system is part of a contract that's under non-disclosure. So it's hard for me to know what libraries pay for the systems that they use. I would generally say that open source systems, especially big ones like Folio, you don't do it because they're cheaper. Because when, again, there's no magic in lowering costs through open source software development patterns. So it kind of depends on hosting costs and service costs and all of that. So I would say that for some libraries, an open source implementation might be less expensive. For others, it might be more expensive. So again, cost is not the big driver. I think it's the control, ownership, and values behind it.
Thank you. Question from Nelson. Have you seen any US consortial COA implementations that have chosen to work with vendors outside the US? Your slides point to Bywater, but what about other vendors as friendly competition?
So it's interesting in the COA world that there are major COA support providers in kind of every country and region. So, there's PTFS in Europe that is very successful. There's there's one for Ireland, there's dozens in India, but they each kind of work with customers in their own geography. So it's just kind of shaken out that way. So, Bywater is the main one in the US. They'd be kind of hard to compete with. There were some smaller ones that were around for a while. But right now the main provider in the US is Bywater. But they're not the main one in the world. There are lots in the world. They are kind of concentrated geographically across support providers.
Okay, last question for now, although if anybody else has any others, please go ahead and put them in at this point. This one's from Judy. How do you think places like medical libraries will use library technology in the future? We just discarded the vast majority of our print.
Well, so it goes along with what I was saying before about every kind of library kind of having their own technology systems behind them. So I guess it depends. It used to be the tradition that medical and law libraries within a large university would have their own ILS systems. In recent years, those have mostly migrated in favor of the automation system used by the entire campus. So the idea of kind of a law library running Sierra while the rest of the campus runs Alma or something, that doesn't happen as much as it used to. So when I look at medical libraries, I see a little bit different patterns, but they're doing the same thing, but in kind of a more larger degree as what's happened with academic libraries is the shift from print to academic. So sure, a medical library may not have any print collection at all, so they're not going to exercise the circulation features, but they are going to use the electronic resource management capabilities and discovery. So that more or less fits with the direction that academic libraries are going. Another difference is that a lot of medical libraries serve many different institutions, hospitals and clinics and so forth that may or may not be part of the university system. So it's kind of complicated, and there are some systems that are specialized for medical libraries, like the Cyber Tools for Libraries tool, but it's, not a big deal in large academic medical libraries. So, I kind of talked around the issue, but I would say that I don't see quite the same patterns in the medical library field as I'm seeing in the academic. And again, I didn't answer that very well. If you want to send me an email, I'll try to give you a better answer with more data in front of me.
Thanks, Marshall. Okay, this one's a multi-sentence question from Laura. Integrated library systems have been channeling most functionality towards electronic resources. However, print materials have not disappeared, and even during the remote services peak during the pandemic are still often requested by patrons. How much attention are the open source systems giving to the needs of librarians to catalog and manage print books and serials?
I see the same dynamics happening on the open source and proprietary side. So in the same way, Alma, you're using it, has fairly good print resource management and cataloging capabilities, and has a knowledge base in the community zone to get bibliographic records and interaction with RCLC. So it's kind of all there. So it's also kind of all there with Alma and COA, with FOLIO, where, there is a pretty sophisticated metadata management capability built into it to be able to do high quality cataloging with print and other resources, and to be able to do circulation and all of that in the same kind of way. So I think expectations are that academic libraries will continue to be involved with print materials for the duration. Proportions may change. And then when you look at COA, for example, well, it was built to manage print resources, and it's weak on electronic resources. So you see some libraries like Virginia Tech using COA to manage their print resources, and they've implemented something else, Coral, and the EBSCO products to manage their electronic. So it's all there. It depends on how you want to put it together, but it would be unrealistic for an academic library anywhere in the the near future to invest in a system that also didn't do excellent management of print materials. And the other thing, seeing lately more, is kind of remote storage, Harvard style, storage, large scale storage that you have to interact with. So, certainly the requirements for managing print have changed from on-site to off-site, and you need to have the technology to be able to manage the request and delivery of all of that too.
All right, one final question, maybe a little bit of a fun one or something to keep us thinking, pondering as you leave us. This is from James. Technology is ever changing. What are the new technologies librarians need to focus on?
That's a hard question. So I don't tend to worry a lot about trendy technologies. There's a lot of kind of Internet of Things and all of those kinds of kind of more fun technologies that I think are less strategic, but there are good services surrounding those that can benefit libraries. So I think it's important for libraries to think of the strategy that they need technology to fulfill for them, kind of mission focused technology, and find the technologies that fit into that. So you can look at a lot of different technologies that are positioned as new and innovative and interesting, that we've seen those come and go so many times in the course of the industry. I can remember when people were excited about QR codes. Now folks are excited about 3D printers. And those come and go because they're not that strategic to helping the library carry out its core missions. I think now the things that are kind of more the strategic and important technologies that we see coming out are kind of better analytics, predictive analytics, more visualizations, more patron engagement technologies. So what I'm seeing a lot lately, what I'm thinking about lately, are how can libraries implement these kinds of engagement and marketing and outreach tools in a way that are consistent with library values, that maintain, strict control of patron privacy. So again, not a great answer, but those are some of the things I'm thinking about along those lines.
Great, thank you. We could probably have a whole nother conversation, just around that topic. Marshall, thank you so much. This was fantastic.
You're
Everybody
welcome.
Participating, we have recorded this session. We will make Marshall's slides available to you. And he mentioned early on that his 2021 version of the library systems report, is that what it's called, Marshall?
It is.
Is available now at the American Library's website. And I've been browsing through it as he was speaking. It is fantastic. Go take a look at that. Thank you so much, Marshall. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. This has been fun.
All right, bye everybody, and enjoy the rest of